years ago for Vision 2020. We had no idea we would be here in our homes, healthy at home in 2020. But back then, you named a value that was so important to you, that we value a healthy community where honest relationships provide all people safety, encouragement, acceptance, and healing, and challenge us to practice gentleness, forgiveness, and continued growth. As we go through these days, we begin a new initiative, Healthy-Highland at Home. One of our greatest gifts are all of those who work in caring fields, in vocations of care for one another. And so during these weeks, we hope to bring you some of our own people with a word of encouragement of how we can be healthy at home, healthy at work, whatever that looks like. So for our first, we hear from Vicki Runnion. We are so grateful for the words that Vicki brings to us. May they help you to practice gentleness, forgiveness, and continued growth as we value being a healthy community.
Hello, I'm Vicki Runnion. Carol complimented me by including me as one of Highland's pastoral care folks, quote unquote. I need to, in full disclosure, say that by education and license, I'm a social worker, but by vocation and heart, I'm a hospice worker and have been involved in end-of-life work for the last nearly 40 years. And I hope that there's been some pastoral care along the way in addition to my social work practice. I really like most to be able to share ideas and questions and experiences, mostly in stories and conversation. So I'm trying to imagine you being here, but I want you to know that I miss you. What I want to talk about today, I think, is maybe a collision or maybe a collusion of work and COVID life and after Easter and personal journey. The day that Carol asked me to do this, I had had two instances in which family members of different patients who were struggling with their feelings about what other family members were or were not doing with regard to caring for their loved one, not visiting, not helping, acting like cheerleaders, refusing to see what was happening. And the response that arose in me without a lot of thought or planning was that we really cannot know another person's motivations. We do well to know some or most of our own motivations. And spending energy or creating a story about it and then responding to that story, you know how it is when you spend hours awake in the night imagining things that you'd like to say to somebody about something that has not actually even happened. So anyway, responding with hurt or anger to something that has not actually happened is probably not a very helpful way to spend energy. It's a natural human thing to do to try to fill in gaps in our knowledge or our understanding. And if that leads to thoughtful questions or exploration or study, then it's a helpful thing. But questions sometimes feel intolerable or too scary to actually ask, so we make it up. As long as we don't believe our own answers without checking, that's probably okay, but it can actually lead to more suffering. Now, sometimes those responses that arise in the course of my work, I hope, are helpful to other people, but sometimes they are lessons and reminders for me too. Sure enough, not a week later, I'm faced with having to learn a new technology, another one, that I don't really want to learn. It adds to my work burden. It is not a natural fit for me in the way that I like to work. And I don't really think it will be all that useful to my West End clients. It feels like one huge cluster of changes in a time when change and uncertainty are already rampant. And I have found myself feeling critical and angry at the people who are imposing it on me. Composing emails that thankfully I have managed to erase and not send because they're stressed too. Speaking of COVID, I and maybe you find myself with a lot of uncertainty. How much longer we will be in this morass of not knowing. How much cleaning and of what is really enough. Is any time in the actual physical presence of friends okay? What's the best way to get supplies and food? What can I do in place of all the things that I used to do, the things I can't do? The questions just go on and on. Whether you live with others or have contact with them mostly through telephone or at work or shopping, you will probably have found yourself having some disagreements, some encounters with others who aren't doing things the way you think they need to be done. They come too close to you. They aren't wearing personal protective equipment. They're not doing what you understand, and you wonder why. Why are you doing that? So maybe in some instances we can ask that question of the person, if it's a friend or family member, and discuss. But sometimes that's probably not very possible, and so we're tempted to make up answers. And somehow that puts me in mind of the disciples in this after Easter time, feeling unsure about what actually went on. How did things come to this point? Wondering and being afraid about how much risk they were actually taking if they went out of their homes. Risk because they were associates of him. Wondering what's next. Wondering who might betray them. Wondering what now? What will I do now? So much uncertainty for them. And so some of my own not knowing, my own uncertainty, some of my anger and frustration over this unwanted technology led me back to a teacher I encountered some years back, and I would like to tell you about him. Frank Ostaseski was one of the co-founders of the Zen Hospice Project in San Francisco around the beginning of the AIDS epidemic. He finally gave in and wrote a book called 5 Invitations: Discovering What Death Can Teach Us About Living Fully, or can teach us about living with COVID, or with unwanted technology, or with family or friends who don't do things the way we think they should. There are 5 invitations, and I could not begin to discuss them thoroughly in this time, but it's a book I recommend. The first invitation is don't wait. Don't wait for things to be normal or for things to be better. Live in the present. The second is welcome everything. Push nothing away. That's a tough one. The third is bring your whole self to the experience. When we are uncertain, there's a tendency to constrict and to just use the aspects of our knowledge or money or connections to solve immediate problems, and we don't bring our hearts and our life reflections necessarily, but they're missing in action if we don't. So bring your whole self to the experience. Find a place of rest in the middle of things. If we're still working, then we kind of might wonder where to find that, because everything seems to take longer. If we're not working, we may initially think that we are resting, but in fact, that's not the same thing. So a place to sit down and breathe and relax and reflect and truly rest in the middle of all of the uncertainty, in the middle of a practice session with unwanted technology. And fifth, cultivate a don't know mind. Cultivate a don't know mind. Now, that is not choosing ignorance over knowledge, but rather being aware that knowledge is limited and finite, and so letting go of fixed ideas about things. This moment right here before us, we've never experienced before. So don't know mind helps us be free to discover, helps us be curious, helps us find unexpected delights as well as costs and suffering in this time. The invitation is to enter a situation or even life itself with fresh eyes and open hearts. Cultivate a don't know mind. I hope that in your moments of awareness of uncertainty, you can rest in the midst of not knowing. Thank you, and I will be very glad to see you in person whenever that happens. Take care.